The day I flossed. My 620,000 penthouse, my mother wore white like it was a wedding. The courtroom was too bright for how sick I felt. Fluorescent tubes hummed above us, washing everything in a flat, unforgiving light. The clerk's voice echoed off the beige walls as she called our case number, and my last name sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. In front of the judge, on the polished wooden table, lay my life in paper form, the deed to my penthouse, clipped neatly to a petition, and a thick binder with my surname written in black marker down the spine. Petition to enforce resulting trust and transfer title to petitioners. Your parents. The judge read, eyes skimming the top page. He didn't look at me yet. He didn't have to. The threat was already laid out between us in triplicate. I sat at the respondent's table alone. No lawyer, no entourage. Just a scuffed folder, a legal pad filled with my cramped handwriting, and a pen I kept rolling between my fingers to stop my hands from shaking. Across the aisle, my parents had an attorney, matching leather portfolios, and the ease of people who had already rehearsed their performance. My mother leaned toward their lawyer, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a tissue. "We'll only want what's fair after all we sacrificed," she whispered, just loud enough to carry. The attorney nodded sympathetically, as if he hadn't billed her for every tear. My father sat straight, backed in a navy suit, tie perfectly centered, looking exactly like a respectable, disappointed parent. Every few seconds, he would shake his head almost imperceptibly, the universal gesture of, "We tried our best with this ungrateful child." The lawyer rose, buttoning his jacket with a practiced motion. "Your Honor," he began, "our clients provided the entire financial foundation for this asset. The respondent is, in essence, deeply indebted to them. The understanding within the family has always been that this property was held in trust for the parents who funded everything." I watched my mother's face while the judge's attention was elsewhere. The moment his eyes dropped to the file, her expression shifted, just for a heartbeat. The softness vanished, her mouth tightened, and her eyes flashed cold, satisfied triumph. Then, like a curtain falling, she slumped again into the role of wounded martyr. "Do you understand?" The judge finally said, looking at me for the first time, "that this petition, if granted, will transfer legal title to your parents." My heart slammed against my ribs, but I made my voice come out even. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. The court recorder's keys clacked steadily, each stroke sounding like a countdown. What I didn't say, out loud, was the sentence that had been looping in my head from the moment I saw the summons. They actually did it. They turned my home into Exhibit A. Their attorney shuffled his stack of papers, pulling out a plastic sleeve. "We have, in addition, a signed loan agreement and email acknowledgments from the respondent, confirming that the parents provided the down payment and that the property was never intended to be solely theirs." Loan agreement. Email acknowledgments. My ears caught on the phrase. "You agreed in writing." Like a hook. I searched my memory, flipping through mental files. I had never signed any loan agreement with them. I had never written anything close to, "The apartment is basically yours." He held up the sleeve, and the paper inside made a soft, artificial rustle. Thicker than normal printer paper, like it had been handled too much. Highlighted lines glowed yellow under the lights. His manicured finger tapped on a paragraph he clearly thought was his checkmate. The judge glanced down, lips moving silently as he read. "On its face," he said slowly, "this appears to show your parents provided the down payment and you consented to holding the property in trust." On its face. That was the problem on paper. For the first time in my life, their story looked more real than mine. I forced myself to sit up straighter. "Your Honor," I said, and heard my own voice level, calmer than I felt. "I will need to address the authenticity and the timing of those documents." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. The docket was full. He didn't want a messy family war clogging up his calendar. "This matter is already in an advanced stage," he replied. "Unless you have clear grounds to challenge these filings today, I'll have to rule." The clear grounds. Today, months of scheming on their side, and I was supposed to dismantle it in one neat sound bite. On the other side of the room, My mother pressed her tissue to her lips, eyes squeezed shut, as if bracing for the injustice of not being handed my home on a silver platter. My father stared at me with a look that combined pity and contempt, the same one he used when I was a kid and dared to say no. They thought the pressure would make me fold. They thought the sight of my deed on the judge's table would finally break me into the grateful, obedient child they'd always tried to paper into existence. They thought they'd cornered me in one hearing. What they didn't know is that by filing those lies, they triggered something they couldn't control. To understand how it got this far, you need to know what kind of parents take you to court for your own home. By the time I bought the penthouse at 32, I'd already spent a decade trying to prove I was more than my parents' favorite trophy. I work in tech, the kind of job people only understand in headlines. Stock options, late nights, product launches. First-generation professional, first real money in the family. To our community, that made my parents visionaries. To my parents, it made me a walking proof of how wise their sacrifices had been. They loved to say, "We invested everything in our child." They say it at weddings, funerals, grocery stores, anywhere there's an audience. It sounds generous until you realize invested is their polite word for own. In my house, every act of parenting came with a ledger attached. We paid for your tuition, so you owe us your career choices. Remember, we sacrificed more than any parents we know. It was never help. It was always a down payment on future obedience. When I was 18, they co-signed my first student loan with a flourish, telling everyone how proud they were. A year later, when I mentioned spending Thanksgiving with a friend's family instead of flying home, my father called me at midnight. His voice was flat, dangerous. "You know, if we pull our support, that loan comes due. We can call the bank. We can tell them you're a credit risk." Suddenly, the signature wasn't love, it was leverage. They made me send part of my scholarship refund back to them to teach you responsibility. And every winter break, they pulled out the loan documents like a leash. It didn't stop when I graduated. When I got my first real job and moved out, my mother called my company's HR department pretending to be a concerned relative. She told them I'd been acting erratic, that she was worried about my mental stability. I found out when HR scheduled a quiet wellness meeting and slid a note across the table. "Your mother reached out. We just want to check in." I remember sitting in that small conference room, cheeks burning, forcing myself to stay calm as I explained that my mother had a history of overstepping, that there was no emergency. That day, I learned how institutions work when someone invokes concern. I brought in emails, documented everything, and, politely but clearly, asked HR to flag any future third-party calls as potential harassment. That became the pattern. They used systems as weapons. Loans, references, character. Call. In public, they wore kindness like a costume. In private, everything was transactional. So when I finally had enough money and stability to buy the $620,000 penthouse, it was more than an upgrade. It was proof I could build something without them. I saved aggressively, watched my credit score like a hawk, and got my own mortgage approval. The only money they ever gave me around that time was a few thousand labeled for furniture. In a transfer memo, the kind of thing normal parents might do as a housewarming gift. At first, they were ecstatic, or at least they looked that way online. My mother posted photos of the view with captions like, "So proud of our hardworking child. Our investment paid off." My father gave tours of my place to anyone he could drag over, commenting loudly about how had always aimed high. Underneath the applause, the barbs started. "Must be nice having our money working for you." My father joked more than once. "God forbid you marry someone poor and they get half our property." My mother would say, laughing too hard. I corrected them. "It's my mortgage. It's my name on the deed." But they treated that like a cute, naive misunderstanding. Then came the push. They suggested I add them to the deed. For tax reasons. Because we don't want you to be overburdened. When I said no, explained that my lender wouldn't even allow that without a full review. The mood shifted. They sulked, skipped calls, And I later heard through relatives that they were telling people I was easily manipulated by outsiders and had forgotten who made you. That's when I started pulling back. Separate finances. No more sharing salary details. No more sending them screenshots of my banking app like some weird performance. I refused to give them a spare key to the penthouse. It was the first real boundary I'd set, and they reacted like I'd stolen something from them. Months later, the thick envelope arrived. No warning, no conversation. Just a plain brown package on my doormat with a quartz seal in the corner and my stomach dropping before I even opened it. Inside, a summons and a stack of pleadings with my parents' names as petitioners and mine as respondent. That's how I learned they'd filed a civil petition against me months earlier. In neatly typed paragraphs, they claimed they had provided the entire down payment as a loan that I had verbally promised. The property ultimately belongs to them, and that I was now threatening to sell it out from under them, leaving them destitute. Their request was simple and terrifying, an order transferring title from me to them. Attached were exhibits, a loan agreement, with my name signed at the bottom in a handwriting that looked almost like mine if you squinted, and didn't know how your own signature feels leaving your hand. Printed emails, where I supposedly wrote things like, "Yes, the apartment is basically yours. I'm just holding it for now." It was like reading dialogue from a version of me they'd invented. The shock burned off faster than I expected. Betrayal turned into something colder, sharper. They had graduated from guilt, tripping and rumor, spreading to full legal fraud. I didn't call them. I didn't scream. Instead, I laid everything out on my kitchen table under the best light I had and started treating it like a problem at work. I photographed every page. I checked the filing dates stamped by the court in the top right corner. I wrote down their attorney's name and bar number. Then I went to my laptop and searched my email for every phrase quoted in those supposed messages. Nothing. No sent messages, no drafts, no trash. That's when I noticed it. The loan agreement claimed to have been signed in our hometown on a date I knew I'd been out of the country for a product launch. I still had the passport stamps. I still had the boarding passes buried in my files. They thought forging my name would scare me into settling. They didn't understand how courts log every move and how those logs were about to turn on them. The next business day, I took that envelope and my growing stack of notes and walked straight to the courthouse records office. The records office was buried in the courthouse annex, down a flight of echoing stairs that smelled faintly of dust and copier toner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in the same washed out gray as the courtroom upstairs. A ticket machine by the door spat out a crinkled slip when I pressed the button. Now serving A102. My number was A117. Rows of plastic chairs lined the room, half filled with people clutching manila envelopes and plastic folders. Behind a wall of smudged glass, clerks moved in slow, practiced motions, stamping, scanning, chatting quietly as if every file wasn't someone's crisis. I sat down, balanced my folder on my knees, and made myself breathe. Panic wanted to sprint ahead. What if it's already too late? What if the judge signs something before I even understand what they filed? Instead, I forced my brain into checklist mode. Step 1, get the full case docket. Step 2, confirm every date and hearing. Step 3, see every exhibit they'd used against me. Paper, dates, signatures, facts. I wrote the list down on my legal pad, like I could anchor myself to ink. When the board finally blinked, now serving A117, I walked up to the window. The clerk barely glanced at me, fingers already hovering over the keyboard. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm the respondent in a civil case. I need to see the full docket and get copies of all filings and exhibits, please." I slid the case number under the glass. She typed it in, eyes tracking the screen. "Okay." A printer behind her hummed to life, spitting out sheets. She gathered them and slid the first set through the slot. Petition, proof of service, initial scheduling order. I flipped through quickly, recognizing the petition I'd received in the mail. Then I heard her murmur, "Huh, that's odd." My head snapped up. "What's odd?" She scrolled further, eyebrows drawing together. This shows a request for default judgment that was withdrawn. She clicked a few more times. It says here they claimed you never responded, but the court flagged the service as inconsistent. Proof of mailing didn't match the address on file, so the default was denied. That was new. They'd already tried to win without me ever stepping foot in the room. They had tried to erase me from my own case, and the only reason it hadn't worked was because some automated system or overworked clerk had caught a mismatch in an address line. While I was processing that, another voice came from the next station over. If you're going to challenge authenticity, you don't just want these printouts. I turned. A younger clerk, maybe late 20s, leaned slightly toward my window, careful to keep her tone neutral. Her badge read, Lena. You'll want the original exhibits from the evidence room, she said quietly. Ask for the exhibit log and the chain of custody sheet for your case. Everything that comes in, who brought it, when, what ID they used, it's all logged. If something doesn't match, judges take that seriously. Something in my chest unclenched a little. An actual procedure. A trail that wasn't controlled by my parents' story. The first clerk clicked around again, then printed a one-page form. Here, she said, sliding it over. This is the exhibit log. Looks like the petitioner's attorney personally filed exhibits A through D, the loan agreement and email printouts, on this date. She circled a timestamp with her pen. I stared for them here. I stared at the time and date. It was a random Tuesday afternoon, a few weeks before I'd even known any of this existed. My name was nowhere near that line. Just his, neat and secure. Sitting at a side table in the corner, I spread the docket and log out and read. That was when I saw a line about a lien enforcement hearing scheduled in 2 weeks and, below it, a note, recommended transfer order drafted, pending final hearing outcome. In other words, on paper, the machine was already halfway to handing them my home. The petition, the fake loan, the pretend emails, they'd been enough to get a draft order written. The Penthouse was one hearing away from being taken, not in reality yet, but in records that banks and title offices trust more than any conversation. My throat went dry. Is there any way to cancel or postpone that hearing? I asked the clerk. She shook her head slightly. Only the judge can change it. But if you file a motion to contest and an affidavit today, it'll go straight into the file. At least your side will be on record before the hearing. The Elena leaned over again while the first clerk was busy with another stack. Also, she added, voice low, they submitted printed emails. Those can be checked. Judges like metadata, timestamps, headers. Sometimes they order a forensic review if you actually raise the issue, not just say this feels wrong. I thought of my work email with its obsessive security, the logs that recorded every login down to the IP address. My personal inbox with its history and access logs. If those emails were real, there would be a trail. If they weren't, there would be a vacuum where my parents' exhibits pretended something existed. The clerk printed one more sheet and passed it to me. Next. Hearing date, she said. Looks like it was just set. That's next week. Next week. Not 2 weeks anymore. The ground shifted under me. The hearing I just sat through upstairs was that hearing. This wasn't hypothetical. I was already standing in the middle of the storm they'd been quietly building. I gathered the copies into my folder, the paper heavier than it should have been. My to-do list rewrote itself in my head, get certified copies of my passport stamps for the date I supposedly signed that loan. Talk to IT at work about email logs. Ask the bank to pull records of the actual down payment. The more I read their lies, the more I realized they'd forced every institution I'd ever dealt with onto my side. If I knew how to ask the right questions. The next place I took that folder was my bank, straight into a small office where a man in a gray suit waited with my account pulled up on his screen. The bank office was small and too cold, the kind of room designed to make customers feel grateful just to be there. A framed photo of a generic family smiled down from the wall above the desk. The officer sitting across from me glanced from his monitor to my folder and back again. So, he said, fingers hovering over the keyboard. You're involved in a legal dispute over your property, and you need documentation of the original purchase funds. Yes, I said. Specifically, I need an official statement showing exactly where the down payment came from, any wire transfers around that time, and a copy of my mortgage application, the one where you listed my income and assets. He nodded. All right, we can do that. He clicked through a maze of internal screens, eyes scanning as numbers and dates scrolled past. Down payment was. He whistled softly. Okay, here we go. He turned the monitor slightly. I saw my own savings account, years of accumulation, draining in one big, authorized transfer to the escrow company. No incoming wires from my parents anywhere near that date. I'm going to print your statement for the 3 months around the purchase, he said. This will show the source of funds. And here's the transaction history. No large transfers from the names you mentioned. The only one I see from them is months later. $2,000. Memo line says gift furniture. He hit print, then moved to another tab. And your mortgage application, he added. We keep a scanned copy. A PDF popped up, my name at the top, my salary and employer, my declared assets. Under gift funds, the line was blank. No parental contribution. No mention of a loan. He printed that too, stamped each page with the bank seal, and slid the stack across to me. Black and white proof that my parents. We funded everything. Story was just that, a story. From there, I went to the one place my parents couldn't charm their way into my company's IT office. The security engineer, Mark, listened while I explained there was a court case, that someone had submitted printed emails supposedly from my work account. We log everything, he said, swiveling to his dual monitors. If those emails really went through our server, they'll be here. If not, that's its own kind of evidence. He pulled the date range from the petition, then filtered by my address. Rows of emails appeared. Project updates, meeting notes, calendar invites, but nothing with the subject lines quoted in my parents' exhibits. Nothing with their supposed wording. I can export a log showing there were no outbound emails matching those dates, times, or subjects, Mark said. Also, see this? He pointed at a column of IP addresses. You were logged in from our office network on these days. On others, from a hotel IP overseas. But on the exact timestamps they claim you wrote those emails. No logins at all. He compiled a report, signed and dated, stating that no such messages existed in our server history and that my login records contradicted the alleged sending times. I added it to my growing pile bank statements, mortgage application, IT logs. Finally, I stopped by the passport office and requested certified copies of the entry and exit stamps from the week I allegedly signed that loan agreement in our hometown. The stamps showed I was in another country. The law might not care how it felt to be lied about, but it cared a lot about dates and locations. By the time I walked back into the courtroom, I wasn't empty-handed anymore. We were right back where we started, the judge on the bench, my parents at their polished table, their lawyer already mid-sentence. And as we've shown, Your Honor, the respondent acknowledged in writing that the property was always intended for the petitioners. The judge looked down at the file, pen poised as if ready to sign something. I felt that old wave of helplessness rise, and then halt against the weight of the folder in my arms. Your Honor, I said, standing, may I address the exhibits and offer additional documentation? He hesitated, then nodded, briefly. I stepped forward, referencing the case number and exhibit labels exactly as they appeared on the docket. Regarding Petitioner's Exhibit A, the alleged loan agreement dated June 14th, and Exhibits B and C. The printed emails, I have evidence that contradicts both their contents and their claimed dates. I handed the clerk the stamped bank statements first. These show the full down payment came from my personal savings. There are no large incoming transfers from the petitioners before the purchase. The only transfer from them, months later, is labeled as a gift for furniture. Next, the mortgage application. This is your bank's copy of my application, Your Honor. Under gift funds, there is no entry. There is no lender record of any parental loan or gift toward the down payment. I watched his eyes narrow slightly as he read. Then I produced Mark's report. This is a summary from my employer's IT department. It confirms that no emails matching the petitioner's exhibits were ever sent from my work account on the dates and times they claim. It also logs my login locations and IP addresses, which don't match the alleged sending activity. Finally, the certified passport records. And these show I was overseas on the day I supposedly signed the loan agreement in our hometown. The room felt different suddenly, the air tighter. The judge shifted his attention to my parents' lawyer. "Counsel," he said slowly, "how do you reconcile this loan agreement's date and location with the respondent's documented presence abroad?" Their attorney's confidence faltered. "Your Honor, my clients assured me. These documents were provided to me as is. If there's any discrepancy, it must be a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. I cut in, then caught myself. The judge looked at me, and I forced my voice back to calm. "Your Honor, may I also point out that the printed emails in Exhibits B and C lack full header information. The formatting is inconsistent with standard email clients. The timestamps don't match my work's time zone, and there are no originating server details." He looked down at the exhibits, frowning. "Clerk, bring me the original exhibit folder." When it arrived, he flipped through the plastic sleeves. The mails really were just bodies of text on paper, no headers, no routing information, nothing tying them to an actual account. "Counsel," the judge said, his tone cooling, "did you verify the authenticity of these emails before submitting them as evidence?" The attorney swallowed. "They were, provided by my clients. Your Honor, I relied on their representations." For the first time, my parents looked genuinely uneasy. My mother's hand tightened on her purse strap. My father's jaw clenched. The judge sat back. "We're going to take a short recess," he said. "When we return, I will address these issues on the record." 15 minutes later, we were all in our places again. The judge's voice was measured, but there was an edge underneath. Having reviewed the respondent's financial records, employer IT logs, and travel documentation, he began, "This court has serious concerns about the authenticity of the petitioner's exhibits and the accuracy of statements made in their sworn petition." He paused, letting that sink in. "Accordingly, the court will be referring this matter for potential forensic review of the alleged emails and for consideration by the appropriate ethics authorities regarding the submission of possibly fraudulent evidence. Moreover, the financial records directly contradict the claim that the petitioners provided the down payment." My mother burst into tears. "We just thought it was understood," she cried. "It felt like ours. We helped raise feelings." The judge cut in. "Do not create a legal trust. Documents do. And when documents appear altered or fabricated, that's serious." My father leaned forward, trying a different angle. "This is a family misunderstanding, Your Honor. We never meant." "That will be all," the judge said sharply. "The petition to transfer title is denied with prejudice. Any provisional orders affecting the property are vacated. The record will reflect the court's concerns regarding potential fraud upon the court. The respondent is advised of their right to pursue sanctions or a separate action if they choose." For a second, everything went quiet inside me. No racing thoughts, no what-ifs. Just a strange, surreal calm. For once, someone with authority had seen through them in real time. Outside the courtroom, my mother rounded on me, mascara streaking. "You embarrassed the family," she hissed. "You made us look like criminals." I met her eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. "I didn't do that," I said quietly. "Your paperwork did." My father muttered something about regret and lawyers and taking this further, but I was already turning back toward the clerk's desk. "Your Honor," I had said moments earlier, before we were dismissed, "I intend to file a formal complaint regarding the fraudulent evidence." He'd nodded, not surprised. They walked into that building thinking they'd take my home. They walked out with something else following them instead. A paper trail they couldn't control. I carried my folder back to the penthouse, knowing the legal battle had shifted, but the fallout at home was just beginning. For a week after the hearing, I left the moving boxes where they were, half packed like a bad omen I hadn't bothered to unpack. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I finally sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by cardboard and the faint chemical smell of packing tape. I had really believed I might lose this place. I'd wrapped my dishes in newspaper, folded my clothes into labeled piles, prepared myself to hand over the keys to the people who raised me. Instead, I reached into the nearest box and pulled out a frame. Not a family portrait. A photo of me in an ill-fitting suit, holding the offer letter from my first real job, grin too wide for my face. I set it on the shelf by the window, where the light from the city spilled in. I used to think my parents' names were stamped on every good thing in my life. Turns out, the only name on the deed that mattered was mine. After the emotional dust settled, I treated my boundaries the way I had treated my defense systematically. I went downstairs to the building office and asked management to remove my parents as emergency contacts and to note explicitly that they were not authorized to access my unit under any circumstance. We changed the access code on the front gate and updated the file with my lawyer's details instead. I called the bank and asked them to add extra verification steps to my mortgage and any account linked to the property, no changes without in-person ID, and a phone confirmation to a number only I controlled. Then I pulled my credit reports and set up alerts, just in case my parents' creativity moved on to loans or cards I'd never applied for. With my lawyer's help, I drafted a short, clinical letter to my parents. It said that all financial support, in either direction, was officially ended. That any future communication must be in writing. That unannounced visits would not be welcome. No accusations, no explanations, just terms. Sitting in my reclaimed living room, I thought about how easily paper can lie. Emails, loan agreements. Even family stories repeated often enough. They can all be twisted. The only defense is keeping your own records, asking for originals, learning how systems log and store information instead of assuming they're magic. They are still my parents. But that doesn't make them safe. The court filing didn't just attack my property. It finally gave me permission to stop pretending this was normal. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from the court administration. It confirmed that an investigation had been opened into potential fraud upon the court and possible misconduct related to the submitted evidence. On the same day, my phone buzzed with a final text from my mother. "You'll regret this. No one will side with you once they hear what you did to us." I blocked the number without replying. That night, I stood on my balcony and looked out over the skyline, the city lights flickering like a different kind of court record. My parents believed taking me to court would prove they made me. Instead, the court record proved who we really are. They weaponized the system to erase my home. The same system etched their lies into permanent ink and left my name exactly where it belonged. If you've ever had family use guilt, money, or paperwork against you, I hope this story shows you that you're not crazy and you're not powerless. You're calm, your evidence, and your understanding of the system can be stronger than their lies. If this resonated with you, hit like so it reaches more people in the same situation. Subscribe if you want more stories about toxic families and quiet justice. And tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest or what you want to hear next. Your story matters. And sometimes, putting it on record is the first step to getting it back.